welcome once again to the Acid Trash Jamboree, and to what is ostensibly an offshoot of the Odds and Ends mini-series, where I'll be homing in specifically on a clutch of what I'm loosely defining as progressive and psychedelic releases. So yeah, up for discussion today are 4 very different albums, so without further ado, let's see what's on offer. Firstly, we have the self-titled debut long player from the relatively short-lived Italian symphonic prog rock group Quella Vecchia Locanda. A lot of people seem to rate this combo highly, though in truth I may never have even become aware of their existence had I not seen YouTuber Derek Higgins talking about them a few years back. Yeah, my knowledge of vintage European prog rock is still pretty lacking, unfortunately. Anyways, I'm yet to check out their second and final album, which seems to be considered their masterpiece, but yeah, I quite like this one. I mean, it's one of those where right out of the gates you can hear who they've been listening to. You've got the trilling flute and tumbling, bluesy, jazzy, rhythmic breakdowns of Jethro Tull, the cutting, treble-heavy bass and fuzzy synth textures of Yes, and the subtly complex instrumental interplay of Gentle Giant, whilst the inclusion of Donald Lax, a clearly Vivaldi-worshipping violin player in the lineup, instantly brings to mind not only Curved Airs stuff, but also kind of foreshadows what Van der Graaf would do with Graham Smith a few years down the line. So after an impressively busy and forceful 1-2 punch of an opening salvo, the third piece brings the pace down a touch with some moody Moonchild meets Franco Battiato balladry, whilst the fourth is a curious mixture of purely atonal avant-garde frippery and swaggering hard rock. The clutch of tracks that follow are a touch less tightly composed than the ones that open the LP, oftentimes breaking down into meandering solo instrumental showcases and stuff like that, meaning they're a bit lacking in the memorability department, despite featuring some lovely moments. But speaking of lovely moments, the closing tune is just gorgeous. Yeah, hinging around a supremely melancholic theme worthy of Eric Satie, this is mostly carried by Massimo Roselli's tender piano work, with mellotron, violin and flute eventually adding splashes of instrumental colour. Things closing out with a brief song section and a welcome reprise of that beautiful opening theme. So yeah, as I said, whilst I do like this album, in spite of its rather obvious borrowing from the bigger progressive names of the day, my main criticism of it would be that it does feel a little bit undercooked, compositionally speaking, in its second half. Still, there's more than enough here to make it an enjoyable occasional spin, if nothing else. And now for something completely different. Yeah, the Parable of Arable Land, the notorious debut LP from US experimental stalwarts the Red Crayola, originally released early on in the Summer of Love in June 1967. Now, unfortunately, this CD version issued by the Collectables label in the 90s is a bit of a confusing mess, with the track listing not corresponding with what's on the disc at all. Yeah, instead, rather annoyingly, for the most part, both the regular songs and the so-called free-form freak-out interludes are clumped together into long medleys, instead of being indexed as separate pieces. So the 20-minute stretch that makes up track 1 appears to contain the first 3 songs, the moody groover, Hurricane Fighter Plane, which is very much in the spirit of Sean Bonnywell's Music Machine, the harmonica-drenched Transparent Radiation, and the thoroughly psychedelic mini-epic War Sucks, with its tense, agitated electric 12-string jabbing and primitive attempts at rhythm keeping, actually bringing to mind early Amon Düül of all things. On track 2, we get the propulsive, Electric Prunes-esque garage psych gem, Pink Stainless Tail, which for my money may be the highlight of the whole record, and is sandwiched between 2 further freeform freakouts. followed by the title piece, which is more in the vein of said freakouts and features a chaotic melange of percussive sounds atop an increasingly obfuscated tape loop of unknown origin. So that's track 3. Then track 4 features one final freeform blowout, before the record closes with the eerie, Doors-ish lysergic ballad, Former Reflections Enduring Doubt, which Collectables decided to split across 2 CD index tracks, because when you've made such a monumental mess of the rest of the CD, why the hell not, I suppose? So yeah, that's what we're up against on this rather ancient reissue. Unfortunately, I didn't do my research before grabbing this on the second-hand market, and only found out about the properly indexed Sonic Boom remaster version when it was too late. But enough about all that technical stuff, and back to the music a second. The freakouts, to be precise. Yeah, these are actually the work of a collective dubbed the Familiar Ugly, a 50-person strong ensemble of Red Crayola's fans and hangers-on, who improvised on and made a racket with whatever was to hand, not only for this record, but apparently during the band's early gigs too. And yeah, what a glorious, soupy din they cooked up, preempting other large-form, anything-goes, anti-music troops like the A-Band by 20-odd years? And yeah, just to bring up Amon-Düül again, but I really wouldn't be surprised if they had a copy of Arable kicking about in their commune, alongside the early Floyd efforts and that first Hapsash and the Coloured Coat LP. Yeah, the resemblance to their own jammed-out freakery really is uncanny at times. Anyways, I admit I only got around to hearing the Red Crayola long after I'd already fried my ears with all that other gear. So, for me at least, the impact of this album was somewhat diluted by said thousands of hours spent absorbing that stuff. But yeah, that's not to say I can't hear how ahead of its time it was and how influential it's proven to be down the decades. So yeah, another essential stopping off point on your psychedelic voyage, if you haven't checked it out already. Next up, again, something totally different. Mental Experience's reissue of the 1981 album For a World After by the project known simply as Requiem. Now, Requiem was the brainchild of a guy called George A. Speckert, a classically trained viola-playing American who moved to Germany in his early 20s to be with his pen pal girlfriend, and who soon began teaching music in schools. Eventually, he became interested in modular synths and associated electronic gear, the end result of which was this rather intriguing little release. Now, the 6 tracks here are intended to paint a picture of various groups of survivors attempting to rebuild the world after a nuclear holocaust. Though, as it's a purely instrumental work, equally you can just kick back and enjoy the heady sonics. The 9-minute Destruction is a thoroughly moody opener, playing out like Klaus Schulze in a particularly relaxed mood, with Speckert's multiple layers of phased-out synths floating over a dark drone and a skulking drum machine beat, also featuring guest guitarist Massimo Grandi, chipping in with some strikingly Dave Gilmour-ish lead guitar interjections. Track 2, Devastation, the longest cut on the album at 11 minutes, is moodier still. Again, very Schulze-esque in its slow, gradual build and emphasis on hypnotically repetitive rhythms and meandering minor-keyed solos, rather than catchy, hummable melodicism. Though, speaking as a card-carrying Klaus freak, this is certainly no bad thing. From Realization onwards, the tracks are much shorter, and thus a bit more tightly focused, with Speckert bringing in occasional catchy synth motifs to break up the soloing, and Grandi's echoed string work now bringing to mind Manuel Gottsching, though again its playing on the following Relevation is so uncannily Gilmour-esque that it could almost pass as a long-lost track from the Wish You Were Here sessions. The penultimate piece, Construction, is perhaps the album's most accessible moment, very much in the perky synth pop mould of contemporaneous Tangerine Dream and Peter Baumann. Then the closing Creation rides off into the sunset on burbling sequencer and triumphant modal synth noodling. So yeah, as with the Quella Vecchia Locanda record, overall this is another one that's very much the sum of its influences. Though if you can excuse its lack of originality and simply want a nice fix of satisfying progressive electronic stuff that mostly stays on the right side of cheesiness, then by all means check it out. Lastly for now we have Illuminations, the 6th album by the legendary Buffy Sainte-Marie. And as per usual, it's the only one I have of hers for the moment. But yeah, what a curious little album. Now, despite being familiar with other bits and pieces by her, I'm certainly no expert on Sainte-Marie's career trajectory, so please forgive my ignorance, but from what I can gather, it would appear that Illuminations is a bit of an outlier in her discography. Yeah, a one-off, oftentimes experimental work that, unfortunately, apparently sold extremely poorly on its release in 1969, but has since been rightly re-evaluated and recognised as a diverse and daring collection of psychedelic folk music. Okay, so the songs on Illuminations can be split into roughly 4 groups. At its most accessible and approachable end, you've got thoroughly gorgeous ballads like The Dream Tree, The Angel, and the achingly hushed and intimate Guess Who I Saw in Paris, as well as raucous and rickety rockers like He's a Keeper of the Fire, Better to Find Out Yourself, and the loose, Dylan-esque folk blues of Suffer the Little Children, the last few of which really give Sainte-Marie a chance to stretch out her vocal cords. Moving up the freak ladder a couple of rungs, we find darker, witchier, almost gothic-leaning pieces, like the dissonant Mary, with its spectral organ work, and the creepy, dust-blown campfire horror tale, The Vampire, which is shot through effectively with subtle wisps of eerie synthesizer. This brings us nicely onto the record's most out-there offerings, namely the bookending songs, opener God is Alive, Magic is Afoot, and closer Poppies. The former features thoroughly impenetrable and mystical lyrics penned by none other than Leonard Cohen, which is set to an almost maddeningly monotonous and repetitive non-melody. The song bookended itself by strange electronic vocal modifications, whilst the latter feeds the Vampire's spooked nocturnal balladry straight down the spirit dimension's own echo chamber, coming out the other end, sounding a heck of a lot like the natural precursor to Jandek's Nancy Sings, or Shora Lombardy's at their most otherworldly. Which just leaves us with the album's centrepiece, Adam, a song written by Richie Havens, which featured on his debut LP, Mixed Bag, from a couple of years earlier. And yeah, what an astonishing creation this is, pretty much encapsulating Illuminations' myriad stylings into one neat 5-minute package. Opening with quiet, proto-Cosmetia electronic waftings, the peaceful ambient mood is soon blown apart by some thoroughly groovy, full-band raga rocking, which is punctuated rudely by Hell's own farty fuzz bass, as well as our old friend, the late Peter Schickley's gorgeous sweeping string arrangement. Yeah, wonderful stuff, which one other reviewer rightly compared to the contemporaneous work of the Silver Apples. So that's Illuminations for you. Though I can't finish without praising Sainte-Marie's vocals a bit more. Whilst her heavy vibrato style may not be for everyone, you can't deny her formidable range, going from sweet, gossamer light whisperings to all-out, howling at the moon madness at the drop of a hat. Yeah, what an incredible set of pipes. Right, that wraps up today's episode. I recently dug out a couple of boxes full of this kind of stuff, so expect a bunch more videos along these lines in the coming weeks. If you haven't done so already, please hit the subscribe button to be kept up to date on all future videos. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you again soon on the Acid Trash Jamboree.